This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
Welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. My name is Adam Vohra. I am so glad that everyone's listening. I did want to share my gratitude to everyone who has listened to the episodes up to right now. We recently had my friend Brian Howie on from the Great Love Debate podcast, which was an exceptional conversation. I encourage everybody to revisit that. Additionally, I had my good friend Austin Glazer on a couple of weeks ago, and he really just was able to peel back his professional skin and really become vulnerable and have an in-depth conversation. And I really hope people are enjoying my guests and their stories, and really just like the vulnerability that we're featuring here, which has yielded their journeys to growth. Today, especially grateful to have my friend Renee Vardouniotis here in the studio, aka Renee V. Renee, so great to have you. I met Renee at a conference here in Stamford, Connecticut, A to B Con 3, hosted by our mutual friend Brandon Godoris. I was a featured speaker there. And, Renee immediately, we connected shortly after I spoke. And it was just like a very natural conversation that we had. And the fact that you're also Philly based was huge for me. I love running into Philly people. My family's from Philly, big Eagles fans. And, Philly people just have that edge. Renee is a speech language pathologist and a mindset specialist. Her organization is Mighty Minds Academy, where she is fully immersed in really just enriching people with knowledge and helping them grow and refine their mindset. Renee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. How's your summer been?
Busy. Busy with the kids home and, just travel and enjoying family time. But yes, very busy, but good busy.
Beautiful. I kind of just want to jump right into it. If you can just like briefly introduce yourself to my audience, and then we can kind of jump into like your story.
Sure. So I am Renee, and I am, as Adam said, I'm based in Philadelphia. I did live in New York for a good chunk of my adult life. So I have not only the Philly edge, but I have the New York edge. So you got to watch out when you hang out with me. So I've been a speech therapist for over 23 years. Took a turn a couple years ago in the pandemic and really discovered personal development and how important that is to our growth as humans. So I developed programs based on what I was learning, and it was specializing in building and maintaining and protecting our teens' confidence. And I do that through mindset strategies and advanced communication skills. So I'm really like a double faceted human where I have the speech therapist side, but then I work on the mindset as well with my students, because our thoughts affect our feelings, affect our actions, and affect our results. So we have, before we get results for anything, we have to focus on our thoughts. And that is all what the mindset program does.
That's awesome. And, obviously like a lot of things culminated into you getting to this part of your journey. One of the things I really enjoyed doing with my guests is really going on to their early years and like their early upbringing, where they're originally from. And, I think that's really important when establishing the story. So can you tell us a little bit about the early years of Renee? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in King of Prussia, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. Born and raised.
Very
my
familiar
parents
with
still
it.
live there. Pardon me?
I'm very familiar with that area.
I know. I think most people are. It is more than a mall. There is more there. I had a great upbringing. I was surrounded. My neighborhood was surrounded. I knew everyone who lived in every house. We all went to school together. We would play at night, jailbreak and things like that. The whole neighborhood. And ironically, now that I've moved further away, I'm running into all my friends from King of Prussia. Their children are now going to school with my kids. So it's pretty ironic how the full circle happens. When they find out that Renee lived in, King of Prussia, this is her house, and I have neighbors. They're like, "Oh, are you another one of Renee's neighbors?" Oh, we're all Renee's neighbors, and it's funny because it's true. I'm like, "Oh, you went to high school with your mom," and things like that. So it was a very great upbringing. My parents are, teacher and businessman, and I have one sister, and we grew up together in the best of ways. I think I always felt like I was meant for more, even from a very young age. But I didn't really get supported in my, my friend group and my family. Kind of when you are what I like to call the rainbow glitter sheep of the family that just thinks differently and has different aspirations for life. It doesn't always get received in the most welcome way, and I think it's because who you're surrounded with is, with your family, if their thoughts aren't like that, then it's very hard for them to support you as a person, because it's not their belief system or what they're used to or what they know. So over time, I always stood out, I think, in my family, and sometimes a bad way, but for the most part, I always felt very different.
Mm.
So but I went to Catholic school, so a lot of that is a fixed mindset too, where you just really don't know life outside of the little pod of elementary school. Like when you get to high school, it's if you don't continue on that path of Catholic, you go to public, and the whole world changes for you.
Yeah.
You realize that there's more out there. So I did go to public high school. I was a cheerleader.
What was
I
that
played softball.
transition like then for you?
It was well, I have to say it was easy for me. I was looking to expand myself, and I knew going to Catholic high school I would not, because it was pretty much the continuation of who I was surrounded by, and what I was learning in Catholic school. So I was really open to the idea of, and even when I was in elementary school, I even went to the public school to see it in 6th grade to see if I would like to go there. So, I always had that kind of open mind of change.
Mm.
So I did go to the public high school. I tried out for cheerleading. And what happens is, back then, I don't know if it's like that now, but you meet the cheerleading squad before school starts. So you have camp and all this stuff.
Mm.
So I had already built a lot of friendships entering the school. And that was a really easy transition for me. And I loved it. I loved the different types of people, different groups. Historically in Catholic school, you're kind of all one and the same.
Yeah. See,
So
like it's funny because like one of the things you said, the rainbow glitter sheep, and that's so cool to say because most people will categorize themselves as the black sheep, and
mhm.
that's like a positive way to look at it. When did you first identify yourself as like, okay, I'm a little different than my family. I think differently. My ideas are different. My aspirations are different.
Very young,
Do
very young.
you do you remember the moment?
There's not a specific moment, but rather a chain of moments that I discovered in just what I was choosing to do with my days as opposed to what I was being told to do with my
Mm-hmm.
days. Um, and always feeling like, not that I didn't belong, but that my parents and my sister were like over here and Renee was over here. And it wasn't in a bad way. I just at that
Yeah.
time didn't understand what that meant. And it obviously, when you're young, that can cause a lot of conflict. And because you're trying to learn who you are growing up, and to feel different than the people who are raising you is really a hard pill to swallow, because who are you being guided by if it's not by your family?
Yeah.
So, I always felt like I needed more. I wanted more. And as wonderful as my upbringing was, I mean, my parents are wonderful humans. They couldn't relate to me. And I think, that's really hard for a child to go through.
Absolutely. And like as you're charting your path, and I do love how you um presented it very optimistically. Like where rainbow, I've never heard that and I love it. Um so it wasn't a secret that like, you were doing things a little differently. And when was there a point where like you made a big decision, um, and you may have gotten some pushback, and where it's like, okay, like I really am charting a path that is creating maybe, like maybe inviting some pushback.
So I think my choices in my husband has been we've been together for 20 almost 5 years, 25 years. So I think
Wow.
when I made a decision, yeah, to be we went to college together, and we shared friends and all the things, and he was 2 years older, so I never really got to date him so much in college, because by the time I discovered he existed, he graduated. So when I left college, I made the decision to go to NYU for graduate school, and my husband is from New York.
Okay.
And so I made that decision. My parents were always very supportive of education. Wherever you go, we are going to help you, and that we want this for you. So like in that sense, it was accepted and all the things. But when I graduated grad school, I was already dating my husband, and I made a decision to stay on Long Island and get my first job in a school
Hmm.
and move to an apartment by myself on Long Island. And I think my parents were expecting me to move home.
Okay.
And I said, well, I have to make a decision here. Do I want to pursue this relationship, which I knew he was the one, um, or do I want to move home and live a life that's not going to bring me joy, away from my husband and away from, a lot of my friends lived in New York, in the city. So, I was always hanging out with them, all my college friends. So, moving home would have been probably financially smarter, but not smarter in the sense where I would feel fulfilled. Only
Okay.
because I probably wouldn't have even moved back with my parents if I moved back. I would have, I was very, very, very independent and
Yeah.
not wanting to live under on anybody's rules, and or having to explain myself to anybody. So I think that was a shock for them. And just knowing that if that's where I was going to build my life, that there would have to be so much travel between Pennsylvania and New York to see each other. But I was willing to take that risk, knowing that I was so in love, with my husband. So that's what we did. I moved there, and then we ended up moving in together, and we built a house, and had a family, got married, all the things. So it worked out for the best. But
Yeah.
there was a lot of tension for a while, because of the choices I made to stay there and to do things kind of my husband's way, and not, lug him back to Pennsylvania and say, you have to live here.
Yeah. Where did you do your undergrad?
Penn State.
So you went to Penn. Oh, okay. So big school, and then to NYU. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, it's funny because like you're in these two major cities, but obviously KOP is more suburban, obviously. Um, what is your relationship between like being in a suburb and then like the big city, and then like obviously Long Island to New York City, very similar, where you're like close enough to the city to be able to immerse yourself, and then also like a safe distance away, and you have the peace and quiet.
Yes.
Um, so like,
Yes.
which do you prefer?
Oh, suburbs, 100%.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always that way. I mean, I lived in Manhattan when I was in my early 20s. So
Mm.
that is the best time to live there, because you don't mind certain things, right? I
Yeah.
loved riding the subway. It got me from point A to point B very quickly. I learned the city really quickly. And then when I moved to Long Island, I was only about maybe 20 minutes away from Manhattan. So we would go in all the time. It was we could walk to the train station. It was very, very accessible. And my husband and I and my friends, we would always go out in the Manhattan. And then as I got older, it became more of a pain in the rear end to go into the
Yeah.
city and deal with the crowds, and how expensive everything is. And if you want to get into a exclusive place, you have to wait in line. It just seemed like a lot of friction.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I totally
yeah.
agree. Like, I totally agree because like, I used to like when I was younger, I'd be like, all right, like let's go into the city. We can have so much fun. We can see everything. We can go to all these places. And I tip my hat to people who live in New York City like full time, where it's just such an overstimulation of senses.
Yes.
And a good example of that is, my sister, she lives in Wynwood, and
Mhm.
we did like a weekend in the city, and like I'm more attuned to just like the hustle of it. Like I walk fast, I talk fast.
Mhm.
Like I can navigate it, and her being in Wynwood and her office being very close to where she is. I remember that weekend being like kind of packing up the schedule, and then also being like, listen, like this is gonna be draining for her, because like you kind of have to be on like max senses at all times in the city, just walking
Yes.
around and doing things.
Mhm.
um and it's funny because I have friends who are like, just they're New Yorkers, and
Yeah.
the way they move, like, yeah, like I tip my hat to them. But I do, when they come out here in the suburbs, I see them try to be that way here, and I'm like, like I get it, we're only like 50 miles away from the city, but like you could take a chill pill now, like just like
Yes.
take a deep breath and enjoy the fresh air. I did want to go back to something though, that you were speaking about, in regards to your husband, because I think 25 years of marriage is something special. 25 years of marriage is something that, one might argue is rare nowadays. Where you're able to, just continue to build upon that relationship. Um, so let's talk about your husband.
Okay.
In the early days, like, when did you realize like he was the one? And what things have you incorporated over the years to ensure that the relationship is still fresh?
So I just want to clarify, I haven't been married for 25 years. I've been married for 19, but we've been together for about 25 years. Just want to clarify that. But
Still counts.
it does count. It does count.
Yeah.
It does. But you just said marriage for 20. I was like, oh my gosh, that's really putting me in an old age. So yeah. So I think when I met my husband, I knew I was extra. I mean, you know how a lot of people have a type, right? Like they probably go after similar humans for
Mhm.
relationships, and he was like the picture of what I've always dreamed of a partner. But it would just seemed way out of reach very early on, and we developed a relationship, and it was funny because my brother-in-law, who's my husband's brother, was my friend in college. So it was almost like I grew up with these people. So after college, when I made a decision to pursue this relationship, which it was mutual, to be honest, it was like almost like a magnet. Like we always felt like we needed to see each other. We like when he would come visit his brother at Penn State when I was still there. The weekend was planned for us to hang out. It wasn't like it was always there was always this just magnetism with the two of us. We got along so well. We had so much fun. We had a lot of in common. The timing wasn't right at that moment when I was still in college, but once I went to NYU, I made the decision that, and I was dating someone else. Unfortunately, I think I broke his heart in half, but I knew that Yanni, who's my husband, was it for me. And there's just a feeling you get when you understand that the more you think about someone, if that person is on your mind all the time, then you have to take a stab at it and see if,
Yeah.
because where are those feelings coming from? It was such an intense feeling that I had for him. I'm pretty sure it was mutual because it's the minute I broke up with the other guy, he was at my door, and we've been together ever since. So I understood in the process that sometimes we have to break hearts, sometimes we have to close doors, sometimes we have to be put in uncomfortable situations with others in order to get on our path, on the right path. And I wasn't doing the other guy any service by staying with him just for fear of breaking his heart. I had to follow my own. And
Mm.
in that, the other gentleman I was dating found his wife, and like little weeks after. So, it was meant to be for both of us not to be together. Um, and my drive to build a relationship with my husband was so strong, and so it was all very exciting for me. So um yeah, so I think in the marriage, the excitement's always been there, but then once you have kids, it complicates things.
Okay.
And my husband works, he's in construction, he works a lot. And when I was raising my children, they're now almost 16 and almost 11. They from babies, it was a lot on me. It was a lot of a weight on my shoulders to raise them pretty much I don't want to say by myself because it's not true, but more alone than with my husband, if that makes any sense. So
Carrying the load.
yeah, yeah, and I know a lot of moms can relate to that, and dads too, if it's flipped for them. It's a lot of work and a lot of patience, and I was working full time, and trying to juggle babysitters and all the things, and it wasn't fun for me.
But the early motherhood.
Early motherhood, and I think my husband and I, because you mentioned about how do you keep it alive and fun, during that time it was very stressful on our marriage.
Mm.
And there was a moment, I think, when we were married for 5 years that we were like, I don't know if this is right for us. I don't know. So that was
Yeah.
really scary for me,
Yeah.
realizing that, we weren't getting along. It was a very stressful time. Living on Long Island's not easy.
Yes.
It's,
That's what I hear.
yes, it's not. And I had to really build a tough skin when I
But
moved
like,
there.
what about it? What about the environment?
Well, there's a mentality in New York that's, I think most people understand, but when you come from where I came from in Pennsylvania and you move there, you almost have to switch how you react to things. It's, I can't even explain how I had to make a shift and toughen my skin to be around people. Not to say that everyone is like, I'm just generally saying this. It's not everybody, but my experience was that I needed to build a tough skin. I didn't really bond with a lot of people outside of like my
Mm.
school that I was working at. I made great friends there. But in my neighborhood, so Long Island, if you understand Long Island, it, your neighborhood is the 100-year-old grandma, the people that have older kids. Like nobody's really in the neighborhoods on the same kind of life path, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense, because it's very hard to afford areas of Long Island. So I compare it to where I live now, where I'm in a neighborhood and everybody is kind of on the same wavelength
Yeah.
and, and pursuing their goals and their dreams and all of the things. Where in Long Island, I felt very alone because if I wanted to go hang out with a friend who lived a half hour away, it would take an hour to get there because of the
Yeah.
traffic and all the things. So I didn't have a big support system right in my neighborhood in Floral Park.
Well,
And
I
that was
love
hard.
that you're. Yeah. I mean, I love that you're sharing that because I mean, I think that's so that speaks to how community connected you are. Where it's not that like there's anything wrong with Long Island. It's just that like the demographics are so diverse and there are different age groups and you having that relatable just your people, your group where you could lean on who are going through similar issues or similar things as you were, or even if it was like, hey, listen, sure, something came up. Do you mind, if the kids come over for an hour, like
Hmm.
those kind of things that where you had that support, and I think that's kind of a tribute to where people say, especially in parenthood, where they're like, it takes a village, and
Hmm.
you didn't have that village in Long Island. Um,
Mm-mm.
and at the same time, when you're feeling that way, it can cause problems in the relationship because while you have your family, community wise, you feel very alone. Um,
Exactly.
and like I totally can understand that, and it's funny because one of the things that my family recently did. My dad sold our childhood home. I knew the neighborhood. I grew up in it for 20 years. And, like I remember like the neighbors across the street, we used to play with the neighbors next door.
Hmm.
And, it was like safe. It was a
Yeah.
safety of just like familiarity, and
Hmm.
familiar faces, just you knew like, the neighbor up the street's gonna be walking his dog at this time.
Yeah.
You wave to him every day. It's the routine factor. And when my dad sold the house, I was actually like I was angry sad. I was very, very much like felt like a big part of who I was no longer there. You know, and but then I kind of stepped back and I looked and I was like, this isn't the community that I grew up in. You know, like I don't know any of the neighbors now. All the people who I was grew up with moved away. You know, so it is, you know, like communities I think have seasons also and turnover. And you know, like that was a tough time for me. And you know, sometimes it still is. Sometimes when I visit him, I'll like be like, oh, I'll be there in 10 minutes, and I drive up our road and I take a look at the
Yeah,
house that I grew up in.
of course.
And you know, and it's that nostalgia and the memories that are associated with it. Um, but you know, like obviously, like you didn't have that in Long Island. You go back to King of Prussia. Um, you know, now you're a couple years into your career as a school speech pathologist.
hmm
In regards to what has being in that field given back to you, you know, you picked it for a reason. Let's talk.
Okay. So I think when I made the decision to study communication disorders, it was it to be honest, it was a shot in the dark. I was like, I want to work in a school, but I don't want to be a teacher. What else could I be? And I picked it that career path very it was not a serious decision. It was a okay, I'll try that. And I stuck with it. So, you know, it comes from and a lot of our kids are struggling with this, like not being able to decide what they want and who they want to be and what they want to do. And it causes a lot of anxiety when you really, you know, we're young when we make these big decisions about our career path. So I just stuck with it because I didn't know what else to do, to be honest. And it worked out for the best. You know, I ended up falling in love with what I was doing every day and helping kids communicate. And I've worked with really severe special needs kids that, you know, we were able to see some breakthrough with, which was it's so rewarding. But for the kids that were a little less, you know, that needed a little bit less attention in that sense, those kids were my little projects, right? So understanding that they're having difficulty with either their how they're saying their sounds or how you know their vocabulary. There's the umbrella of speech therapy is pretty wide and big of what you could do with it. I chose to work in a school. I wanted school hours. I wanted summers off. I wanted all the things, you know, and it
Yeah.
ended up working out in the best of ways for my family that I had the same kind of hours my kids did. And then, you know, we were off at the same time and things like that. But I think what's the most important thing that I've learned in speech therapy is that there's a lot of people that need speech therapy. And it blows my mind because the numbers just keep going up with the needs. And
Why do you
to
think
be
that
able to,
is?
I think there's a lot of causes for that. I think there's kids that have gone through trauma of one way, shape, or form, and that affects how they communicate. There's children who don't have the best role models at home. So when you're working on their grammar and things like that, they're really basing it on what they hear at home.
Mm.
And that's really a hard habit to break because when you're teaching them for a half hour as opposed to where they're living, it's really there's a lot of times there's a divide
Such an
in
imbalance.
yes. So the parent involvement is super important, and I wasn't getting that a lot with where I was working in New York. It was a lot of people who have come over to our country. You know, they come from other countries and they speak different languages. They work three jobs. You
Mm.
know, so the focus was not necessarily on the child; it was on just
Okay.
survival.
So was it like
So
ESL kids who like English is a second language? They're so you're not only teaching them how to speak correctly, you're teaching them the language.
a lot of times, yes, the most
Yeah.
of the kids. I mean, there were other service providers that helped out with children who were English as a second language. There's two separate kind of um areas of school. So there's the children who are not native speakers. So the ESL teacher would work with them. If they tested in their language that they had a language disability, then I would see them. But it's really hard. There's a fine line between not understanding English because it's your second language or being able to speak it well and actually having a speech disorder, a language disorder.
Yeah.
So
So
there's a line, but those families were wonderful, but they didn't know their rights in the special education, industry. They didn't understand that they could ask for certain things, and they were able to ask for more if they wanted, and it should be kind of given to them. It was a lot of administrative control over what services were being provided. So it was really disheartening for me because I had kids in my room that needed a lot more than what I was allowed to give them.
yeah, I mean it sounds like a lot of moving parts, and then managing personalities of both the parents, and obviously making sure the kid is getting what they need. I want to kind of segue this into just an overall outlook on communication. I mean, I think communication is something, obviously you dedicated your career towards refining communication for folks at a young age. And, it's so funny because more often than not, I think that a lot of the things that people get into, um, like whether it's basic arguments in home or larger conflicts, either on a professional level or, in any arena, it really does come down to communication. I think when people poorly communicate, um, their intentions might not be poor, but they're just not expressing themselves the way that they are meant to be understood. Talk to me a little bit about how um, you see communication being important, and how you incorporate the importance of strong communication in your home and in.
So I think it's important to understand that communication isn't just verbal. It is, your body language. It's how you understand. It's your perspective. There's so many facets to it that aren't really talked about too much. Like, so
Mhm.
communication is more than just talking. It's about understanding. It's about, conflict resolution. It's about really letting people know what you want in life, and not sitting back and saying, okay, well, I don't want to communicate this to them. This is how I want to be. When you become solid in your communication, whether it be nonverbal or verbal, you're just able to progress in your life a lot easier. You grow because you build relationships, and relationships are everything. So if a student I had was struggling with, let's say fluency, and they had a severe stutter, that's going to affect their whole life. Not just because of the stutter, but because they're going to be unable to express their wants and needs in a way that people are going to receive it the
Yeah.
best of ways. So communication is everything. It's everything. If we
Well,
don't have good communication skills, we're just not going to live a fulfilled life.
yeah, I mean, I think people just ignore like the nonverbal communication a lot, and they'll say something, but like it's also like the tonality of their voice, and
Mm-hmm.
their body language, and just like just like like very little like facial, just like gestures that they make.
Mm-hmm.
um you know Recently, like I spoke to this guy who's like an expert in just like, he works for the police department, and when they're questioning potential suspects, he's like, half the time it's not even what they say. Like it's the way they're moving,
Yeah.
it's how they position their hands, it's whether they raise their eyebrow, it's where they look when they're talking to us, and all these little things that I factor into, like whether there's any validity to what they're saying. And for me, you know speaking publicly, and needing to captivate people in a short window of time, like
Mm-hmm.
you really need to streamline the communication. What tips would you give, to people who are entering into whether it's a public speaking space or whether it's on a professional level when they're going to have to give presentations? What do you think are the most common mistakes people make when it comes to representing how?
I think lack of practice. So with everything in life, we learn through repetition. We learned how to speak through repetition. We learned how to eat by, practicing. We learned how to walk this way. So it really goes back to practicing. And when people don't practice, it's noticeable. If they're going off the cuff, you can pretty much notice that, right? And we don't want to sound like so scripted, but the repetition is what's so important, because the more we repeat things, the more we build programs in our mind. So if we repeat, our message over and over again, we're just going to become more and more proficient. And that's with everything, right? So instruments, sports, anything that we want to
Yeah.
grow and improve, we need to practice. And that's just basic, life knowledge.
Life, yeah.
When we think about speaking, and I work with a coach on my speaking because he's able to tell me that I'm either using too many details or I'm going off on tangents that don't need to be there. And he kind of boils it down to what exactly needs to be said. And that's really helpful. So I think mentorship is huge when it comes to being a speaker or anyone that has a voice in a public arena. Having somebody to bounce this off of and give you feedback and not take it personally, because that's not what it
Yeah.
is. They're there to help, right? So, but the repetition, if that is the biggest mistake, people who have a message is either not practicing it enough to be able to speak to it very, very pointedly, and also maybe giving too much information and not what's really the meat and potatoes of what's important to be said. So I
It's so
think,
funny that
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, go
It's so
ahead.
funny that you say that because that's exactly what Brandon says. When Brandon and I, were working on my A to B speech, like it was very much like, I recorded it a couple of times. Me and him went through it piece by piece by piece. He was like, you don't need to talk this much about this. You don't need to talk this much like that. Focus more on this, provide more details on that. Obviously having gone through his speaker school multiple times, I kind of knew certain things, but like sitting down and actually like watching myself on film was actually like a big way for me to refine my message because that's really important. You want people to hear what you're trying to get across. They're not clogged up by a bunch of fluff details that aren't relevant. You're right though. The practice, and I think practice when it comes to anything in life, it's like, yeah, you just got to get the reps in. I mean, even from a young age, like you went to whether it's music practice, you went to football practice, you went to, practice is like, that's how people get better at anything. How has your, journey, you said you've been working with a coach also. What are things that, were presented to you that you were just like, oh, wow. Like,
So I have several coaches. I have invested in, business, speaking, um, understanding marketing. I mean, because I come from an education background. So for me, business doesn't come naturally to me. So I think, you know, I never even understood what business was until I started a business. And it it's definitely not for the faint of heart. It's very hard. There's a lot of details about it that I didn't even understand existed.
yeah,
Even down to like the kind of message you're sending out on social media is so important to building a business, and it takes a lot of time to understand who you want to talk to and what you want to talk to them about. Especially when I like someone like me, I have like opportunity confusion where I'm like, "Oh, should I talk about this? I could work with that person. I'm all over the place, and it doesn't work that way. Just because you have all these skills doesn't mean they're the skills you should be using to help others. So refining that has been a big aha for me. A big
Yeah,
aha.
I mean, I think that's like something that I can totally relate to. Like,
Mm-hmm.
my business is about a year. Here you hear a lot of no's. You hear a lot of no's in the
Oh,
early
every
onset.
day.
And you need to have thick skin when you get those. There have been some no's that I've taken personally, and then understood that I shouldn't. But it might have taken a day, it might have taken a week for me to be like, all right, like that's fine. Maybe in the future. Um, but yeah, like it isn't for the faint of heart. I just like understand that like if like you said when it came to the reps, if I continue to do the same things every single day, like and you stack one day becomes a week becomes a month, and eventually the progress will just like present itself.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I want to kind of pivot now to like your business because the communication and then the mindset, and I think those go very much hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know some of the best communicators who I look up to, the way they communicate is a direct reflection of their mindset. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that. Um, Talk to me a little bit about the relationship between mindset and communication, and some of the things that are key pillars to how you've built your mindset.
Mm-hmm. So when I first got into personal development, I was introduced to Bob Proctor, and I would watch his YouTube videos, and I said, this guy knows things that and is talking to me about things that I've never heard of before. And I always felt like in my career, there were certain students that I was working with that were really soaring and meeting their goals. And then there was kids that were just hitting a plateau, and I didn't understand why. What was it different about those kids that the other kids, they were progressing, and some of them just hit a plateau. So, and I always wondered about that. Like, I always did everything by the book. I learned all my techniques and strategies, and then over time, you practice just like everything else, and I became really good at what I was doing. Um, and what the first thing Bob showed me hit me like a Mack truck. He wrote thoughts, feelings, actions, results. And what I realized was that I was addressing these kids, like I was giving them techniques, right, which is action in order to get the results without going back and looking at the first two pillars, thoughts and feelings. So if we address the thoughts, then you feel, if you're having good thoughts and you're having optimistic thoughts, then you're feeling good. And then you take, you know, very, very specific action in order to get a result. So what I realized was that I needed to address my students' thoughts. What were they thinking? How are they feeling? What were their
Mm,
beliefs in their ability to get better? And there was a very, very distinct difference between the one set of students that, were soaring and the ones that weren't. And that's because they believed they could, and they
mm,
devoted their time to getting better. They had a different mindset. So what I started doing was starting to address their thoughts before I even went into any kind of therapeutic techniques with them. And that's where
okay.
I saw a big difference in the
Yeah.
progress of my students.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thoughts that you have, and yeah, I do think, like when it comes to like thinking positively and that attracts other positive thinkers also.
Hmm.
And kind of like incorporating that culture in any environment that you're in. And that's something I understand that like events of that people have gone through shape their mindset.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, negative thoughts and I mean positive like that it's a choice or it's ingrained, or like what's your like opinion in that sense?
It is a choice because we think
Yeah.
about 60 to 75,000 thoughts per day. And science tells us that we have, I don't know, I think it's like 90% of our thoughts are repetitive and 80 of them are negative, 80%. So if we're constantly allowing negative thought, I mean, we were pretty much born positive until we get these programs from our education system, from our parents, from our ancestors, from our environment. And that's what turns, your thoughts negatively is listening to others and allowing what they're saying to go into your mind over and over again. We see it on the news. I mean, the news is really there to cause a lot of fear in us. And when you start your day watching the news, it's implanting scary things into your mind, negative things. Always. I mean, there's maybe one or two positive stories they tell on the news. So growing up, I think we're probably similar generation. My parents had the news on all time. They still
Yeah.
do. And for me, I made a decision that I wasn't going to watch news anymore, and I wasn't going to allow my kids to watch the news because it's instilling fear and doubt and lack in them. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
totally.
So
I mean, sorry.
when I discovered the power of our thoughts, oh, sorry,
An incoming
I don't know
call.
what just happened.
It's okay.
So when I started,
Hold on. Let me see if it's.
okay, now we're back. Sorry. So
No, it's because you had a
when
call.
I know I should have put on do not disturb, but I didn't do that. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. So I think when I understood that I had full control over my thoughts, full control over what I chose to allow to remain. I mean, negative thoughts are going to come in. I mean, it's just nature and our human nature. But if we allow them to ruminate in there, that we're installing new programs that might not be serving us. So what I tell my students is you can have a really sour thought in your mind, but it's our responsibility. It's okay that happens, but it's our responsibility to turn that to a sweet thought. Just flip it, switch it, change it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I mean, like,
the more,
I totally can identify. Like, you know, I look at the brain now as like anything, like an algorithm, and I think social
Mhm.
media, social media, like like Instagram is like the same thing as my brain, where it's like whatever I actively chase on Instagram, it's gonna keep bringing me to it. And
Mhm.
it's really actually evident when I made a transitional shift into what I'm doing, and rather than it displaying like cars and shoes and like whatever, like trash, like media, when I started to dive into like personal growth and like building my business, entrepreneurship, and motivating ideas and positive thoughts, the more I seeked it out in Instagram, the more my algorithm changed. And I think the brain works the same way,
You're right.
where
It does.
like Rob tracks, like he loves to say, like like what you input is what you get out. And he's not just talking about food, he's talking about the media that you consume. And he's a great example of that, where you know he's been like somewhat of a he's a good friend of mine, but there's a lot of things that I look up to him for, because he started doing a lot of things that I'm doing before I did.
Mhm.
And with Rob, like like he really leans into that, reprogramming your mind.
Mhm.
And for me, like everyone knows, if you've listened to this podcast, which I hope other people have, um, you know, my journey does consist of like having very dark thoughts and being in a dark place, and
Mhm.
having to really just kind of really retrain my mind completely.
Mhm.
And you could look at a situation as, oh, that's shitty, poor me, or you could look at it as, okay, this is an opportunity. What can I learn from it?
Right.
What can I do to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Mhm.
Oftentimes I find that people, you transitioning into wanting to help people and reshaping their mindset. When was that moment for you, when you're like let's talk
During the
about that,
pandemic,
because that was the most
during the
transitional period.
pandemic, yep, that's when I discovered personal development. I mean, that was only a short, almost 5 years ago. And it was just opening doors for me of realization and awareness of concepts that I wasn't taught in school. And it really resonated with me to be able to boil down pretty big concepts into smaller bite-sized pieces for kids, for teens, for kids, for young adults to understand, and have it be a bridge between what the academics are learning at school and the curriculum and actual real life skills, because we're not taught that in school, and we should
Mm.
be. My
So
son's
initially,
blasting.
when you no worries. So initially, when you first started, were you to improve your personal career and really
Hmm.
reaching your students, and then you're like, oh wait, like I
Right. Yes. It pretty, you hit the nail on the head. It went from working with my students in the school on this type of stuff to discovering that maybe this is my purpose, that I'm supposed to help others with this information that I was learning in my early 40s. So for me, it was really important that I pursued that, and that's what I did, and that's what I still do. It takes a lot of time and patience and grit to start a business, and I'm still not even remotely where I want to be with it. Still trying to
Mhm.
find my path, because I've tried several things that didn't work, but I always say I'm like, Thomas Edison. I found 10,000 ways that didn't work, right? And then
Yeah,
when it hits, it's going to hit. And I am very excited for what opportunities that will open up for me when I'm able to help further and wider our youth and how they're thinking. Because when I discovered that for myself, it changed everything. And why shouldn't our kids understand that too? Imagine the change that was the shift that would happen with the mental illness that's rampant right now. And it's all caused by the quality of your thoughts. So if you understand that
absolutely.
and you're intentional about it, it could change the trajectory of your life.
You said the P word, so like I want to talk a little bit about purpose. Um, so now that you've discovered that, like, listen, like I can channel this mindset and try to help other people channel their thoughts and really elevate themselves starting there.
Hmm.
Um, how does that change you? My purpose, what's this shift for you, and what do you do um, on a daily basis, maybe not even professionally, to ensure?
Yes, that's so important and such a good um, question. I practice what I preach. So that for me it's really important that I'm not just saying things and not doing them, right? There's no saying doing gap. Whatever I say, I'm practicing. So I found that in my own personal life with it's made me a better mom, it's made me a better wife, a better friend, a better family member. Just really applying these concepts of, not reacting, responding. That was big with my parenting. Not flying off the handle, at the little things that go wrong every day. It's more about responding and taking what and in that I'm showing my children how to react to things too.
Mm,
So if we're flying off the handle as parents, guess what our kids are going to do? They're going to fly off the
yeah.
handle, because that's where they're learning from us every day. They're watching our moves. They're not listening to us, they're watching. So what I've noticed that even in my own little family, great improvements in our relationships, in our communication, and just understanding each other, because we're all four different humans. So it's not easy to always, look at things the same way. And when you don't, that's okay. But how we react to them is so important. How we react to things that go on is so important. And, my son's a teenager. So he's going through the changes of life. Um, his body's changing, his friendships are changing, he's got to start thinking about his future a little bit more now that he's going into sophomore year
Mm.
of high school. So it's really important for me as a mom to instill in him, all of this wisdom that I'm learning. And I've noticed profound changes in the best
It's
of
so
ways.
funny because one of the things that I've been trying to practice, and actually I've been getting a lot better at that, is putting myself in other people's shoes, and like
Hmm.
just like when I hear something they say that might like boom, like, strike a nerve,
Mm-hmm.
um, like for a second, I'm like, what does their world look like? What does it look
Mm-hmm.
like through their eyes? And when I do that, I'm like, all right, like I guess it makes sense that this is the conclusion that they're falling at, you know. And I've actually been like very conscious of doing that, and recently I had a friend, and like I wouldn't say he has attachment issues, or he's codependent, but he has a lot of the symptoms. And he had a spat with his girlfriend, and he's like coming to me for advice, and I'm like thinking to myself, like, bro, like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Why does this like this isn't even this is trivial issues, and
Yeah.
like I knowing what he's gone through in past relationships and what he's
Mm-hmm.
doing, and like I'm like, all right, like I can understand why he's jumping to this wild conclusion.
Sure.
And sometimes it's just my role to listen. And I think, one thing that's really, really important with communication, sometimes it is just listening.
It
Some
is.
like that's like a huge part of communication. And
Yeah.
I think it's one that's often ignored. And something that recently was told to me that I considered a really, really good compliment was, you're a really good listener, Adam.
Yeah.
And, I, and ironically, like here I am on a podcast, like, and all it is like me talking. But like, I think, part of the reason why I decided to launch this podcast is so I can sit down and listen and hear what
Mm-hmm.
other people are going through, and contrast that with my story and be like, you know what, like, different paths, same feelings,
Mm-hmm.
you know and that's the thing that I really think is important for everyone to understand. I think when it comes to communication, like, different paths, same feelings, communicated differently, put yourself in their shoes, and you can kind of have a better um ability to empathize with people, because I think
Absolutely.
really that's what it's about. um
Mm-hmm.
I love that, like, you're taking your skill set in speech pathology, combining it with mindset, and parlaying that into just a career where you can help people streamline their thoughts into better communication, and then therein reshaping the way that they kind of address situations in their lives. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's super powerful because it's a very unique skill set that you're bringing into your business. Um, so I want to talk about your business, ReneeV.com. I don't love how you shortened it because of the complications in pronunciation. I did it okay in the beginning.
You
Um,
did.
and let's talk about what your goals and plans are for your business, and just the way that you reacted, passionate about
Yeah. So I started Mighty Minds Academy, and it's an online platform that has 3 programs that are loosely based on principles from Think and Grow Rich and from the Thinking into Results program that I invested in with Bob Proctor. That was the whole inspiration, was that I couldn't believe the concepts I was learning, right? So
it.
I had to study the brain in grad school. Being a speech therapist, you have to study the brain. I never understood what the mind was. We studied the brain, so that's technical. The mind is housed within the brain. It's invisible, but we have a conscious and a subconscious. So, and our subconscious controls 95% of what we do every day, our habits. When I learned this, I felt like like God came down and was like, Renee, you've been missing this. And it's just so inspired me to think, well, why am I just learning about this in my 40s? Our kids really need to be hearing this, because once they understand how their mind works, it affects everything in their life, right? So the power of their thoughts, how they set goals, their emotional intelligence, their attitude, having an attitude of gratitude. We're not taught these things in school. So for me, it was really important that I took these. I mean, they're life changing concepts. They are life skills, and be able to get them in the hands of our youth gosh, I woke up and I said, this is what I should be doing. Why was I in my 40s learning this stuff? I studied, I went to school, I did all the things that I was supposed to do to, progress in my life. And I'm very successful in that sense. I have my family, I have a home, I had a job, beautiful, things are great. But there was like a whole world that I was missing out on. And I really felt called and really convicted to bring that to the youth and to be able to work with them. And when you see the aha moment that I had in a kid, oh, there's nothing like it.
Well, it's so funny that you say that the whole world that you're missing out on. It's not so much that there's a whole world missing out on. It's like there's so much that you didn't know that you could see the world in such a bigger light.
You're right.
And that's the craziest thing, like, because I'll be damned if my dad and my mom and my grandparents even knew what emotional intelligence was.
Yeah, no.
Like they didn't really talk about their feelings as much. If you're sad, you're sad. All right. That's a bold statement. Maybe they had more in-depth conversations, but it wasn't really mainstream to talk about how you feel. And I think that's a
It is.
generational thing. I don't think it's like really a cultural thing. I think it's just like that generation, like the boomers and above. Like it was really more like, this is the rite of passage. These are specific milestones you need to go through. These will validate you. That's where you seek it. And if you're not charting this path, then you're doing something wrong. And then you should feel bad about yourself. Mm-hmm. And, this generation of free thinkers was like, why? Like, but I don't feel good doing it, and it's so funny because all right, I got into the show Bridgerton. I don't know how.
My friend loves that show.
And it's like this, oh, not Bridgerton. It's I forgot what it's called. Oh my God! It's this British house, and it's this. All right, whatever.
I know what you're talking about because I pronounce it wrong every time. It's supposed to be pronounced
Downton Abbey.
Yes,
Downton Abbey. I started watching Downton Abbey,
and not Downton. They call it downtown, and they get it mixed. Yeah, I'm with you.
And there's this character in there, and she's like, God, like this structure, this isn't who I am, And I think like when you look at what we're talking about, where with this new wave of just all this knowledge that's available and exploring your inner self and the emotional intelligence, like that's her in that show is a micro version of what like an entire generation is doing now, and actively seeking ways to just like really improve their lives from inside out, and shaping that mindset where like people didn't do that. They were robots. And
right.
It's kind of sad. Sometimes I kind of get sad because now when I try to explain these concepts to, older people who I know, like,
well, there's a level of, I think with them is a level of, they're not interested. They feel like they kind of display a fixed mindset where they're not really interested in growing anymore. They feel like they've done their job. They were born a certain way. This is how they are. And they don't believe in change in themselves. And I feel like we should constantly be changing. Constantly. I'm not the same person I was even last year. And, people who have fixed mindset don't appreciate that. They just say you've changed. I'm like, well, we're supposed to change. We're not supposed to stay the same. We're just not. We're put here to continually grow as humans, not to just say, okay, put a pin in it, I'm done. That doesn't
so accurate.
It's upsetting to me that a lot of people are taking their gifts to the grave because they don't feel like they can pursue something different and they don't feel like they can grow. They feel like they were born. These are the qualities I have. These are the talents I have. I could never do what X, Y, or Z is doing. Well, guess what? The fact that someone else is doing it is proof that you can do it yourself. They've done it. Oh, I think both. I think people get very comfortable in their zone and they don't see the light outside of it. They don't understand that just stepping a little bit outside of that zone could change your whole life and your whole world in the best of ways. So people, they sit in the comfort because they don't want to be uncomfortable. Well, I've now been uncomfortable for 3 years. I continue to be uncomfortable. And it's okay. It doesn't feel good all the time, but there's so much growth that happens on the outside of that comfort zone. But you have to want that. It's okay. If you want to be in your comfort zone, go have at it. But I'm more of a growth mindset human where I believe that we're not meant to be stagnant. We're supposed to move. We're supposed to meet. We're supposed to network. We're supposed to find joy in things that might not be comfortable. And you will never
Totally.
know until you face those fears. You'll never know. But some people are right with that. That's fine. I'm not okay with that in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just also like, they're routine based, and I'm all for routine, like me incorporating just like healthy habits throughout the day further like allows me to explore different areas of thought and different areas of just like growth. But like, yeah, I think it is a mixture of both. I do think a lot of it's based in fear though.
Yep.
I think of like I think most negative emotions are based in fear.
They are.
And when you strip it down, whether you're angry at someone, like it's fear.
It
You're
is
scared.
fear.
And I think when it comes down to it, there are a lot of things that like it comes down to just not wanting to face trauma also.
Yep.
And not even acknowledge that something was trauma.
Yep.
And I think like, yeah, it is sad sometimes watching people kind of sit in their own shit really, and
Yeah.
not have that desire to, and
Right. But what that does
like
is it's going to pass it down to the generations. So if we're not facing the fears, or if we're not expanding ourselves as humans, the generations below us aren't going to either. So my dream, sorry, the comfort zone is there because if you fear to go out, because fear is meant to keep us safe, right? It's something that we all have, because you don't want to cross a highway without looking both ways. That's, in that sense, fear serves us. But when we fear the unknown, which is like, when we say, I want to try out for the basketball team, I've never played basketball before, the fear always goes, it's always in there of, what if I fail? But it keeps us in that comfort zone, as opposed to
I agree.
making really good decisions and taking healthy risks, not dangerous risks, but healthy ones where we're like, oh, let me just try this. Let me try shooting a couple hoops in the basket. Let me see how I feel about that. Just trying something new scares people.
Yeah. And I think what you're really saying is also like when you've been sitting in fear for such a long time, fear becomes the comfort zone.
You're right.
Where it's like it's normal, like and I'm not talking about fear as much, maybe I'm talking about pain, or I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about sadness, or I'm talking about, and I think that's also like kind of bringing a full circle moment. That's also where you ingrain that negative mindset, that
Mm-hmm.
self-pity, that and when that's mindset's been ingrained over years and maybe even generations, then yeah, like you create this like almost like family identity of just like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, like it's very mundane and blah and almost secretive, and like it is like job, your job, my, I don't mind taking on the role of breaking that cycle and helping people. Like, listen, like there is so much like light
Mm-hmm.
in this world. There are so many good things that can come out of something, like really traumatic or really bad,
Mm-hmm.
or some feeling that you're having. Look at it and be like, all right, like what's the opposite of that feeling?
Yeah. Right. And you have
And
to
I
feel
think
it.
that's super
That's
important.
important that you said that. You have to feel it. So the generations above us that say, don't, stop crying, get over it. that could be damaging, especially to kids when they don't feel that it's okay to feel sad. We're humans. We're going to feel the range of emotions depending on the day.
Yep.
So if we don't feel it, we can't heal it.
That's great. We don't feel it, we can't heal it.
Yeah, if you don't.
That's great.
Yeah. So that's all, a part of what I talk about in my programs is understanding that we are humans, and sweeping anything under the carpet is not going to do anything but make the carpet really lumpy.
Absolutely. Um, I want to talk about like your upcoming appearances. I know you're going to be speaking at the 1% event in Missouri, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk.
Okay. Sure. So the 1%, I'm actually hosting my own conference the same weekend as 1%. So I'm hosting the Rich Thinking Conference in Philadelphia, and that's on September 6th. And I have really amazing speakers coming there. It's been really fun planning this because what has inspired me as a speaker has been in the rooms with people in person and meeting. Like, that's how we met, right? So it's so
Absolutely.
important. A friend of mine always says relationships are rocket ships, and that's true. So I am speaking at my own event. I have 6 other speakers that are, amazing, that I'm just very excited to have the people in that room feel that collective excitement and vibration of inspiration and networking. So that's September 6th. Then I have the 1%. Then I fly out the next day to Missouri for the 1%. And that is
Oof.
really exciting for me too, because a lot of
Good for you.
a lot of people there. It's actually the whole premise of the 1% is, there's going to be a lot of youth in the crowd. So that's my jam. And I really want them to feel that inspiration from me and be able to, talk about their thoughts, because that's my speech is called Think and Grow Mighty, and Mighty Minds is my program. So it's really important for me to express to these kids, concepts that they're not hearing at home or in their school. So that's happening. Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. And I promise I will make your next event. I want to talk to you a little bit about the planning. Is this the first event that you're putting together?
Mm-hmm.
So God bless you. I know how it is.
I know. I see
It's
you.
fun. Okay, that's like, but
Well,
at the end of the day, the
right,
coolest
Adam?
thing about it is the day. What?
It's the choice to say it's
It's
exciting.
choice. Absolutely. God bless. You're right. But it's just like a whole. It opens up a whole different like skill set,
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
the
I'm really
1%
happy
event.
for your event too. I mean, it's again, I've grown to live uncomfortably. And this is right now another kind of progression of my life, is planning an event where, I'm able to provide for others in Philadelphia area, because there's not really a lot of personal development going on in this area. So to
Really?
expose people to speakers and that will open their minds and possibly work with them, whether it's through their entrepreneurial journey or they're building their business or they're wanting better relationships, whatever it is, there's so many facets of wealth in our lives besides money. And that's connection, it's family, it's our emotions, it's camaraderie with people that understand what you're going through. And it's really important for me to be able to expose people in this kind of Philadelphia greater area to that.
That's awesome. And it's especially heartfelt because of my.
So I think the best way to reach me is at reneev.com. That's my email. Renee V, 2 E's on both, right? RENEEVEE. And reach out. We can set up a time to have a chat. I would love for people to learn more about what I do and also how we can help each other. This is all about networking and entrepreneurship. You know that, Adam, right? It's all about
Oh
who
my
you
God,
know,
yeah.
not what you know. So it's important that I get to know as many people as I can and see how I can be of service to them.
Anybody's directly with Renee.
And
I
obviously
really want
follow
to
me
end.
on
Oh, sorry.
Instagram too. Instagram is, at Renee_VEE.
At Renee_VEE. She is in my followers, and I do follow her, so should be easy to find her.
Sit down, and write down all the things that you want, all the things that you desire to have. It could be as big as, being an astronaut, whatever it is, and make your goals and follow them. They could be small little victories every day towards your goal, because that's what I'm dealing with right now, is trying to remain positive through, being an entrepreneur is not easy. It's not fun often because there's a lot of stress involved, and but understanding, if you have that purpose, that you want this, that you want to go there, that you want to be this person, once you write it down, it becomes a program in your mind that this is what I'm going to do, and it gives us kind of a GPS to follow. So I think it's really important that we sit down and really think about what we want. And our kids aren't doing that. I didn't do it for many years. What is it that you want? What is it? And sometimes that takes a little bit of discovery, right? I never thought about that. So I have to really write it down. And it can sound ridiculous to write down things that you want, right? It sounds so simple. No one's doing it, or a lot of people aren't doing it. So once you sit down and really think about what it is you want, who you want to be, kind of life you want to live, then everything else the path will open up to you. Once you make a decision is like the first thing you have to do.
Love that, Renee. Renee, thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to share this with my audience. Renee, and feel free to. Thank you so much,
Adam.
Renee.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.